Welcome to the Study Committee on Violence Against Healthcare Workers. We had originally planned to meet live at Northeast Georgia Medical Center, but due to the challenges of COVID, we had to change our plans. And so we're having a hybrid meeting here so that we can Zoom and live stream. In just a moment, I'm going to ask the committee members to introduce themselves, but we also have a number of people on Zoom and some, I think, in the hallway, although a lot of people are in here. The meeting is live streamed on the Senate website if anybody wants to watch it later. We have a number of speakers on this important topic, so I'll ask everyone to be brief so that we'll have time for questions from the committee. Written comments will also be accepted and can be sent to me. Thanks very much to the staff for putting this meeting together. You were sent 2 documents ahead of time. One is a summary of Georgia law on the subject and also covers what other states have done. Thank you very much, Alex, for putting that together. And the other is the proposed guideline from the Joint Commission, JACO. And we also have, as of this morning, a timely article from Georgia Public Broadcasting on this exact issue. To set the stage, there was a study committee on this same subject matter in 2014. A number of recommendations were made, and as a result, our current law provides for enhanced penalties for assault against public safety officers, which includes emergency healthcare workers. There were a number of other recommendations, including increased training, and not all those have been implemented. We know that violence can take many forms. My goals for this committee are to gather any data that exists in Georgia about the scope of this problem, to evaluate whether the law that we currently have in place is being used to prosecute anyone, to consider the current options that healthcare workers have when injured by a patient, and to look at best practices that might exist in Georgia or in other states. We have speakers from all sides of this issue, and I look forward to a productive meeting. We do have some speakers with time constraints, and we'll try to accommodate their requests. If you're here live, please wear your mask unless you're speaking. So with that, I want to have the committee members that are here introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce the folks on Zoom. Senator Al? Oh, sorry. Wait. Oh, sorry. What mic are you?
10.
Okay.
Hey, everyone. I'm Senator Michelle Au. I represent Georgia's 48th District, which is North Fulton and Gwinnett counties.
Okay. And Dr. DeVay?
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Mohawk DeVay. I'm an emergency physician, and I'm the Chief of Emergency Services at Northeast Georgia Health System in Gainesville.
Let me introduce my assistant, Sky Park, who will be taking notes throughout the session. Wait, what mic are you? Okay.
My name is Ashley Gresham. I am the Vice President of Emergency Services at Grady Health Systems.
Okay. Other committee members that are on the line? Whoever's on as Georgia Senate, is that Senator Miller? Oh, that's you. Okay. Senator Hatchett, I see you on there.
Good morning. This is Bo Hatchett. I represent the 50th District up in Northeast Georgia, and it's a pleasure to be here. I wish I could make it there in person. I'm sorry.
Do you know if any of the other senators are on here? Okay, I think Senator C is on there. Senator, if you're there, can you unmute yourself? Okay. And then we also have Senator Butch Miller, Senator Steve Gooch, and then Kelsey Reed, are you on?
I am. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelsey Reed, and I am a Nursing Director of Patient Care at Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. I look forward to serving with you all, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. And Jennifer Spites, are you on? Okay, I imagine that some more people will be hopping on a little later. but we do have an agenda, and I know that Dr. Toomey is kind of busy right now. So she asked if she could go early. So Dr. Toomey, the floor is yours.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really grateful that you gave me this opportunity to talk today. Violence against healthcare workers can take many forms. It can also come from psychological and mental abuse, as well as physical attacks. And social media attacks can feel every bit as violating and fear-inducing. Today, you'll be hearing about attacks on healthcare workers, and I'm grateful that I can share what the situation with public health workers as well. Statewide public health team have experienced unprecedented levels of hostility, anger, and disrespect since the beginning of the pandemic response. The work of public health, particularly our nurses and epidemiologists, is not as visible to the public and policymakers as the extraordinary life-saving work being done in hospitals and other healthcare facilities. But the work of public health is similarly life-saving. We are providing testing and referral, vaccinating, contact tracing, and other community outreach, all parts of a strong pandemic response. I and at least one other of our district health directors since the beginning of the pandemic have received death threats and had our home locations published on the internet and Facebook, where the public was invited to come and harass us. We were accused of crimes against humanity and other allegations. I think you can imagine how upsetting that was to both of us. And you also may be aware that similar threats have occurred to state and local health officials nationwide, leading to record numbers of resignations among health officials throughout the country. But I only recently became aware of the horrendous personal, verbal, and social media assaults that our community level staff have had to endure for much of our pandemic response. A sad reality of the challenging pandemic response in this age of 24/7 media and social media everywhere. When I asked about the number of incidents that have occurred throughout the state to our county level staff, I frankly was overwhelmed and dismayed. In fact, they were so numerous and so frequent, the nurses and other staff had just stopped reporting the incidents. In the interest of time, I'll only be able to outline a few that I think will give you a sense of the difficulties encountered by our public health team working in communities across all parts of Georgia at this time. In North Georgia, at a mobile vaccination site, it was disrupted by an organized group of community members. The staff were heckled and booed and intimidated to the point that the vaccination team were forced to close up the site. We have since recognized that we have to need security protection for outreach teams when we go into the field. In another area of the state, one nurse wrote about constant hostile social media and other verbal harassment directed toward her, along with false information about the vaccine to the point of being threatening. As she said, I'm from this small community. I know everyone and everyone knows me. I go into the grocery stores and to church and I see these people who are attacking me and saying false things about me. It's demoralizing and frightening, and it's hard to be living here. And I can only imagine in a small town how different that is than for me living in Atlanta. We have received numerous reports of members of the public upset over mask recommendations and other public health efforts, threatening staff and recording these incidents on video. To make clear, under HIPAA, patients cannot be photographed or recorded without consent. Safeguards must be in place to protect against the disclosure of private health information. And our clinics, such as HIV clinics, require a higher level of privacy. These events are not only damaging to staff and threatening to staff, but undermine confidence in public health as a safe, confidential provider of these specialty services. Other incidents that I was surprised to hear about. A disgruntled client attempted to run over a staff member at a testing site. This was at a drive-through event. Staff have been called racial slurs and other derogatory names. One patient who wrote on the intake form that she had not tested positive on screening laughed and later told the staff she had tested positive the day before deliberately exposing several staff trying to provide services. In one county, a parent brought a son for a meningitis booster. While the nurse was preparing the vaccine, the parent almost ripped the vial from her hand, frightening the nurse. I want to make sure you're not getting anything new here, like that COVID vaccine. Patients have passed out hostile flyers about potential liability of staff under the Nuremberg principles for engaging patients in a scientific experiment that is the COVID vaccination, and calling all mitigation measures crimes against humanity. I'd like to close with one final consideration. Recently, this year, CDC completed a survey of mental health concerns among public health staff nationwide. In this MMWR article published in July of this year, 53% of public health staff at all levels reported symptoms of at least one mental health condition, including depression, anxiety, or PTSD. Suicidal thoughts were contemplated at alarming rates, especially among younger staff. Social media and verbal attacks were among the most significant causes cited leading to PTSD and other mental health symptoms. These symptoms were aggravated by the long hours that were being working without being able to take leave or having backup, all the things we are all experiencing even now. I call these unprecedented mental health complications and the aggressive attacks on public health one of the unrecognized and certainly unanticipated sequelae of this pandemic. We have to ensure we give our staff the support they need moving forward, even as they may be receiving negative social media posts, being cursed, heckled, or booed as they work in the community. This kind of community response is a tragedy at a time we are contributing so much to keeping Georgia safe and healthy during this pandemic as we try to recruit new public health workers so desperately needed. I thank you for your consideration of this important topic. I'll be happy to answer further questions now or in the future. Thank you so very much.
Dr. Toomey, would you mind sharing the CDC study that you referred to with us?
Absolutely, I can give you the link right after I get off.
Questions from the committee? People that are here live? Anybody online have a question? Thank you, Dr. Toomey. I know you're very busy and appreciate you taking the time away.
No, I really appreciate this. Is something that's of great importance to me. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, next we've got Northeast Georgia Health System, and you guys could go to the podium there. That'd be great. We'll make sure the mic is, let's see. Yeah, okay, you're good.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm Deb Bailey. I represent the Northeast Georgia Health System, a community not-for-profit hospital system comprised of 4 hospitals serving all of Northeast Georgia. We are grateful to Senator Miller and the other senators for authoring this legislation in the study committee, and we're happy to be here today to speak to you on this important issue. This is a very complex and multifarious issue that is happening more frequently than anyone understands. Of the approximately 25,000 workforce assaults that occurred over the last year, 75% of those are in healthcare. However, only 30% of nurses and 26% of physicians report these incidents of violence. Those of you that are unfamiliar with our now daily events may be shocked to learn that violent altercations are so common now that most employees in the field now just consider them simply part of their daily job. Often because they are healthcare workers, they frequently rationalize that violence is an occupational hazard and believe that they are equipped to cope with it. However, the alarming increase in violence has become even more exacerbated with COVID, and over the last year and a half, both the number and the severity of these assaults require that we no longer accept this as business as usual and that we study this issue as we are doing today to find solutions. You will hear over the course of this morning many statistics. However, today we want to talk about just one event that happened at Northeast Georgia Health System. We want to put a face on the 25,000 occurrences that happen over the course of the year, and we'll do that this morning. And Destiny is going to come up. She's one of our charge nurses at our Brazelton campus. She's a 19-year experienced RN, and she wants to tell you her experience. Then Destiny and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. Again, thank you for your attention to this. And Destiny.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I would like to start by thanking you all for letting me come and have this opportunity to tell you my story. I'm going to try my best to get through it as unemotional as possible. My name is Destiny. I've been a nurse for over almost 19 years. Most of that time has been in a leadership role, whether charge nursing, managing, or directing units. In all of my positions, I have always had a role of de-escalating situations, conflict resolution, and ensuring that our patients and our staff are kept safe so that we can provide the best care. Over these years, I have witnessed many verbal and physical assaults, but I would like to talk to you about the worst assault that I was ever witness to or part of. A few months ago, I was a victim in a horrific attack that not only injured myself, but two other coworkers, as well as caused significant trauma to other staff members who were on the floor that day and patients and visitors who witnessed. We were providing care to a patient that was well known to us from previous admissions, who had been in our care for over a week, who I felt I had a good rapport with. I had talked to this patient many occasions. A lot of the times when they knew I was on staff, they would call me into the room just to speak with me. On this particular day, this patient became very upset with her patient care tech and attacked her. Although I was not witness to this attack, I heard the screams and came running. When I entered the room, they were pulling the patient care tech from the room, and other staff members said that the patient had attacked her, smashing her face off of the wall and off of the ground. I entered the room to ensure that the patient was safe while I waited for security, keeping myself between the patient and the door, so I always had an escape route. In my attempt to try to de-escalate the patient and calm them down while we waited for security, the patient lunged towards me, grabbing my hair, twisting it very tightly in between her fingers to where no one was able to get me free. I immediately went with self-defense training that I had previously had and attempted to block her punches, her hits, her kicks, and turn my body away from her. She landed many kicks and punches to my head and my neck. She bit me, she ripped my hair out, and she attempted to drag me into the bathroom. One of my fellow nurses jumped in and tried to push her body in between us to try to get us free, as no one was able to get the patient off of my hair. This nurse was also attacked and then received several hits. It took there was over 5 nurses and 3 security guards in this room trying to get this patient off of me. The attack lasted for roughly 5 minutes before they could get me free. My coworkers and I then spent roughly around 6 hours in our emergency room being treated. I suffered a lumbar and cervical strain, had multiple bruises and scratches to my neck, had chunks of my hair ripped out. At the time, I felt no pain. I was running off of adrenaline. The ER doctor told me in a few days, you may feel worse, come back if something's new. When I got home that night, my 16-year-old daughter attempted to try to brush the knots out of my hair, only to have clumps of my hair come out onto the bathroom counter and me jerk away every time she touched my head. I couldn't stand to have my head touched. It took over 2 days before I could get into the shower and actually wash my hair. This happened on a Thursday. Saturday morning, I was having severe headaches, continued to be nauseated and dizzy every time I stood up, and felt like I was going to pass out. I went back to the ER, worried something else was wrong. At this point, they told me I had a post-concussion syndrome. These headaches lasted for several months. I was put on several different medications to try to help with them. And I'm a person who only takes Motrin. As horrific as this attack was to me and to my family and to my coworkers, what happened after the attack was more traumatizing to me. Several days after the assault, I was notified by the sheriff's department that my name and address would be listed on the police report and that the patient and her family were requesting copies of that. I was also notified that the patient's family had come to the hospital, were very upset that charges were being pressed against their family member, and were demanding to know the names of the nurses that they felt were falsely accusing their family member. The sheriff's department recommended that if I did not have security cameras installed around my house, that I would install them, that I would notify the local police in the town that I lived of the attack so that they were aware if a 911 call came from my house, what might be going on. This caused me the most concern. I have a son and a daughter at home. I work 12 to 14-hour shifts. My 16-year-old daughter and my 13-year-old son often are home alone until I get home. I became very concerned that maybe I made the wrong choice. Maybe pressing charges was not the right decision for my family. I was told because of the concussion, I needed to rest and allow my brain to recover, to not have a lot of stressors or stimuli. I was unable to do that at home because I was constantly paranoid someone was going to come to my house. Around this time, I started to have nightmares. I was stuck in a room, couldn't get out. I could hear coworkers and friends on the other side saying they were coming for me. This is exactly what I said to myself during the attack. As I tried to remain calm, I kept saying, it's okay. They're going to get you free soon. Just hang tight, keep blocking the hits. Someone's going to come. I developed restless leg syndrome. I couldn't sleep through the night. I would often get up and have to walk around. I was told that this was my body's way of manifesting the trauma I had experienced. It took several months for this to get better. I was very worried I would not be able to do my job the way I had always done it. Part of my role is to run into the room when something is going on. I was afraid I would run into the room, and what if I froze up? What if I couldn't protect people? What if I couldn't de-escalate the patient? What if I couldn't get the situation under control? I questioned whether or not I needed to still be a nurse. I was also very angry because while I was a victim of a horrendous attack, while trying to provide the best care to someone, I felt punished for trying to stand up for myself and saying that this isn't okay. I continue to feel this way as I wait for a court date to approach. While everything is calm now, I do worry that when we get in a court date, that the patient and her family may become enraged again, and now they know where I am. In the state of Georgia, it's a felony to assault a healthcare worker in the emergency room setting, but this law does not extend to the staff on taking care of patients elsewhere. Yet oftentimes these patients are admitted to inpatient units, as well as other patients who have no way of knowing that they would attack you. We are not protected on our floors. I and many of my coworkers have said, and I have heard during simple assaults, things that happen every day, that it's just part of our job and we keep going. I was asked many times when I was pressing charges, are you sure you want to press charges? Are you sure this is what you want to do? The police said, we'll do our best to get warrants issued, but we need you to be diligent in documenting everything that happens over the next few days and weeks during your recovery. We'll need this because if we're successful in getting a warrant, we'll need all of this information so that the charges aren't lessened or dropped. This is not okay. I have witnessed so many verbal and physical assaults, more over the last few years. Things from urinals and trays being thrown at a nurse, arms being grabbed and twisted, pinching, punching, kicking, spitting, name calling, and threatening you and your loved ones. This is not part of our job. We are there to take care of patients, not to be harmed. I am asking that we all make a stand and say that this is not going to be tolerated any longer, that people will be held accountable for their actions, and that all healthcare workers will be protected. One of my coworkers in the attack resigned for PTSD. We lost a coworker. I don't want to lose any more. I don't want future healthcare workers to not want to enter the field for fear of themselves. I don't want anyone else's children to ask them why they want to be a nurse. Why can't they just quit? Why do they want to go in and help somebody if this is how you're treated? Simply because these children are afraid for their parents' safety. Thank you for your time and for listening to my story and for hearing my voice. I'm hoping that we can help all healthcare workers, especially in a time when we so desperately need healthcare workers.
Thank you very much for telling your story. And Ms. Bailey, could you step back up there? Also, I had a couple questions, and then we'll see if the committee has any questions. Also, I noticed that Senator Miller is on the phone now. Butch, did you want to introduce yourself? Okay, I think he's probably driving, if I had to guess. I had a couple questions, Deb. The 25,000 number and the percentages after that, are those Georgia numbers or
No,
those
ma'am.
country US?
United States.
Okay,
And then I think the Georgia Hospital Association will come up with the Georgia numbers. I think we've organized that so that we wouldn't duplicate some of those
yeah,
efforts.
okay, they're coming.
Mhm.
Then the next question is, was a workers' comp claim filed?
Yes.
Okay, and then the prosecuting of the pressing charges, did the hospital have a role in that, or was that just you as an individual?
Me as an individual, from my understanding in Georgia, the hospital cannot press charges on behalf of the healthcare worker.
I think personally that was news to us, even though we had studied this a number of years ago, that wasn't a part. And I hope as we go through the study committee that we look at that and the possibility of the role that the system can play as opposed to the individual, because I think that when I heard Destiny's story the first time, to me, I heard her saying that was the most, even the horrendous attack, that was the most difficult part for her, her name, her address, and her fear for her and her family. And I personally would like to see hospitals have a role in that to protect our staff.
The only other question I had, Destiny, the training that you referred to, de-escalation training, was that provided by the hospital or did you get that somewhere else?
I actually had it at another hospital as part of my charge nurse training. It was de-escalation and self-defense training. Our hospital is now, we have that available at our hospital, but it is now, we are now putting that out more frequently and encouraging more staff to attend. That was something I asked for after the assault, that it was something I'd had, and I felt that even though it didn't help me get free of the patient, it certainly helped me to protect myself more. And I thought it would be good for everyone, especially the newer people, to have that training.
But I think maybe Dr. DeVay might want to speak to this as a member of the committee, that a lot of that training has gone on in our system in certain areas, but not all areas. And that is what we recognize now, particularly since COVID, that it's absolutely mandatory for everyone at every level of our.
Yeah, I only asked that because there's a lot of mandatory training that hospital staffs have to do. And so that may be something that we take a closer look at.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the committee? Dr. Dave, Dr. Al? Which?
Number 9.
Okay, gotcha.
And for all your work as a nurse over your career. As hospital security is variable across very different facilities, and also certainly has a focus primarily in emergency centers, Can you speak to the time that it took for security to be present? And you said there was 3 security officers in this incident. That's more than sometimes many hospitals have on their staff.
I'm not exactly sure how long it took. Honestly, I was trying to keep myself calm. I do remember one security guard came before the rest because I was crouched down and turned this way away from the patient. And I remember seeing their pants leg. And I was told he had been in the room trying to get me free when 2 others showed up. But the entire assault lasted for around 5 minutes is what they had figured out, because I had been messaged by the night shift charge nurse letting me know she was in the parking lot. And then the time that they got me free. And so they figured out it was about 5 minutes that the whole attack was. And it took I don't know how long it was that all 3 of them were there. My manager might know better than me because she was in the room as well. But it definitely helped. If it wasn't for them, I don't know that I would have gotten free because the nurses were not able to help me.
Thank you. Dr. Rao.
Destiny, thank you so much for sharing. Ken, sorry, for sharing your story. It sounds like it was really hard to go through and continues to be difficult. I wonder, were there any specific changes that the hospital or the hospital system made in response to this very horrific incident? I know we talked a little bit about maybe expanding the de-escalation or conflict resolution training within the hospital. Are there other things that the hospital felt like it needed to do just in response to this?
Absolutely. And I've actually worked closely with a lot of folks at our hospital on this. We did, especially for my unit was one of the first units, they offered the self-defense and de-escalation class 2 on multiple sessions. They then is offered out more frequently to other hospital employees. They also are trying to add it as part of the new hire orientations that all new hires will get this training. We are working on a BERT team, which is Behavioral Emergency Response Team. So the moment you feel that your patient is starting to escalate, you can call a BERT, which would be similar to calling a code or a rapid response. It will send certain members to your area to help try to get that patient under control, whether adjusting medications or recommendations on moving them to different areas to try to prevent a patient from escalating to the point that they attack. We did a debriefing afterwards. We are trying to work on plans. One of the things that I felt was important was there are going to be times attacks and assaults are going to happen without us being able to prevent them. I think it's important that we have a plan in place on how we help those victims right away. Steps that we take with our EPA or EAP, I'm sorry, that's Employee Assistance Program, counselors to come out.
Signage.
Oh, yes. I also asked afterwards for, I had sent some pictures to administration on, I'm from Massachusetts, so a lot of what happens up there just is different than here. So I'd gotten a lot of pictures from other hospitals where it's marked all throughout the hospital that any acts of hostility or violence or assaults towards staff will not be tolerated. So we do have those now posted throughout our system, letting patients and visitors know what we consider to be an assault and that we will not tolerate that assault.
And then I would just add one, the only other thing we did was we did come to you, the Senate, and ask for a study committee because we recognize that as horrendous as these events are and as often as they are, that we weren't the only hospital system in the state. And so thank you very much for this opportunity to look at it from a state perspective and assist.
Thank you, Ashley.
I do.
Hi, Destiny. Thank you for your courage. First of all, thank you. I have 2 questions, if that's okay. My first question, I apologize if I missed this. When was your incident?
It was in the spring.
Okay.
So just a few months ago.
And then my second question is were you able to file charges while you were at work?
Yes. So my manager actually was very instrumental in getting the sheriff's department called to the hospital. They met us in the emergency room, and were able to take pictures of us there and take our account of what had happened.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody on Zoom have a question?
I do have one question. Destiny, first off, thank you so much for sharing your story. That took a lot of courage, and we really appreciate you doing so. You mentioned the BERT response team, behavioral emergency response team. I wanted to know who is a part of that team for you all. We have looked at creating the same team at our local health system, and I'm interested to know who's a part of that team. Is it just security, or do you have members of spiritual care and direct unit leadership as a part of that team, or just who is a part?
Off the top of my head, I just don't want to, I may leave someone off, but I know that it is our security team. It is a provider, a member of our psychiatry department, or Laurelwood. I feel like there's somebody else.
We will get that and share it with the committee. And
okay, great.
It's several people, enough people to be able to offer orders and suggestions on different medications, or different, if medications are needed, and different ideas on how to help the patient to remain calm.
Okay, and I think Dr. Gervais has one more question, but could I just ask everybody who's speaking into a mic to pull the mic closer and speak up, because the people in the back of the room are having trouble hearing.
Sure. Two quick questions. You said this was a patient that you had seen previously. Did that patient have any documented history of behavior assault against a healthcare worker?
Not that we were aware of.
Okay. And secondly, has that patient been seen or had care provided by your team since the incident?
Not on my unit. This patient was brought back into the emergency room. Our administration worked very hard in keeping this patient in the emergency room and stabilizing them there, and in an attempt to not put them back on a unit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Okay, next we're going to hear from Grady Hospital. Ines, did you want to introduce your folks? Or they can introduce themselves? Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here.
Speak loudly for me.
My name is Lindsay Caulfield. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Grady Hospital. And what essentially that means is all non-clinical aspects or departments that touch a family or a patient or a visitor roll up to me. So security, chaplaincy, patient family experience, et cetera, et cetera. And that will have some meaning in a minute. So we had a presentation that was supposed to be up on the screen. If not, I can just use what I've got in front of me.
It was there for a minute. They're working on it.
Did I hit the wrong button? I was told not to hit the middle button. I probably did. I can go ahead and just speak to it if that's easier. One of the things that we were asked to do, we wanted to make sure that everyone, just a quick little reminder of who Grady Health System is. Often people see us as the largest trauma and emergency center in Georgia, which we are. And we very much pride ourselves in that. However, a couple other things, just to, again, remind you all, we are one of the leading stroke centers in the state. You will hear statistics about 80 other hospitals in the state of Georgia transfer our toughest cases into Grady. We also are one of the only 2 verified burn centers in the state. Obviously, a lot of you have heard about our infectious disease program and our Ponce City Market. That's not the right one. The Ponce Center is one of the largest infectious disease programs in the country, probably number 2 or 3 at this point, serving our HIV and AIDS population. And I'm not going to read everything on there, but we have a stroke center, Correll Center, cardiac center, the Avon Breast Center, which is extremely busy and large. And I bring all this up to you because I want you to see some of the numbers. So one of our things at Grady is, one of our tags is our arms are open wide for all. doesn't matter. So anybody and everybody can come through our doors regardless of their ability to pay. One of the key things on this slide that I want to bring your attention to is there are more than 700,000 patient visits a year. That's significant when you think of the visitors and the families that also accompany them, even during the pandemic. That went down a little bit, but that shows you how many people come through our doors on a regular basis. And then you'll see the other statistics up here, 155,000 come through our emergency department, usually through ambulances. And then, some of the things that you may or may not know is that at least 25% of all physicians in the state of Georgia did their training at Grady. And we are 953 licensed beds. So that's we're pretty big. We're pretty impressive. I don't know if you all know that our caregivers, the majority of them are from Morehouse and Emory schools of medicine. Again, just something to remind folks of or give you some new information that you might not be aware of. And then let's get into why we're here. I'm not going to go through all this because Ms. Bailey already brought up the 75% of all workplace assaults happen in healthcare settings. The one thing that I would like to point out is that first bullet, that we are the fastest growing industry in America, employing nearly 20 million workers. 80% of those folks are female. So these young doctors and nurses and others are graduating into the most violent profession in the US outside of law enforcement. That's pretty scary. And then we have some other stats that I think that we can all get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. 78% of emergency department physicians report being the target of workplace violence in the past year. 100% of emergency department nurses that were surveyed with this report reported verbal assault during the last year. And so on and so forth. There's some other stats that we can share with you all if you're interested. Those are national stats. So if you look at who's responsible for this violence, you can see on this pie chart, 80% is the patient on healthcare worker. You'll see other client or customer, but it's very much the patient. And this is for various reasons. But I think it's important to show that this number, and this is US data, but it does mirror our data at Grady. So then you see, let me talk about top incidence types at Grady. Now, we don't have numbers here, but what I do want to point out, and it's very hard to read, that middle one with that star is irate patients. The one on the left, my left, is assault, and the far right is use of force. Now, an irate patient, it's a very broad term, right? So it really is about any intimidation. If you're intimidated in any way, shape, or form, you do not want to continue to provide care or provide assistance to that patient. And Michelle's going to get into this a bit more. What is really important here is about reporting. Those irate patients very well could be in that assault bucket, very well could be in the use of force bucket. But because of the way that people are reporting or choosing to report, it stays in the irate patient bucket. So with security, if they come and they break up something that, God forbid, that Destiny had to go through, that may have been categorized because there was no report as an irate patient within our systems. And so we need to do a better job. Obviously, we have two different systems. We have a CAD system that's with security, and then we have an RL solution system that people report through. But there is such a fear of reporting the entire story. Again, goes back to what these ladies said. It's because it's our job. It's a part of the job. And I bring up all the other folks I talked about before: security, EVS workers, guest services, patient experience folks, because they too are healthcare workers that face the same challenges that clinical folks face. They are, I have my head of security, he's here. I will tell you, there's a week doesn't go by where there's some sort of assault. I mean, they have to jump in and help, but they too also just get assaulted without even being involved in a type of incident. So it doesn't discriminate what you do at the hospital. You know, even myself, I've worked at Grady for 10 years. I've been lucky. I haven't had any physical assault, but just recently, a gentleman who was a problem in the health system, and it got escalated up to me to see if, okay, Lindsay, could you help? And I said, yes, I will certainly try. We had a great rapport. Everything was going well. And then he snapped. And he threatened me. I called Kevin, who's back here. I always rely on my security. He found my home phone number. He started leaving me messages of what I look like and just very scary things. But because we're caregivers, you know, all we did was we put pictures at the door. Security would look for him. We wouldn't let him in. He would be arrested for criminal trespassing. But there was something he needed. I knew that he needed some help, and we're caregivers. So instead of me doing anything further to protect myself, I had police go and do a check on him to make sure he was okay. Now that's a little bit backwards, but I think as caregivers, I think, you know, that's what we're supposed to do, but we've got to think about caring for ourselves and our staff, and helping them to get to the point where it's okay to tell the full story. It's okay to report. And that's kind of where we need your help. And I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Michelle Wallace. I am the Chief Nursing Officer for Grady Health System. I have been an ER trauma critical care nurse for 26 years. And have thankfully not that story, but Destiny, thank you for sharing, because we need more of that. We need more of that. So I just want to start with something Lindsay has said and Deb Bailey said, we don't report. I have personally said, this is part of my job. It's what I do. And that is not helping our staff. It's not helping our patients. It's not helping our families. And so really, I think the biggest thing that we as a healthcare industry can do, and with support, is understanding that it is okay. It is okay to report that this is not a part of our job. We are unprotected. Healthcare workers who are coming to work every single day to save lives should not fear for their safety or their life. That is not acceptable. A couple of things that we have done at Grady. Thankfully, Dr. Hani Atala was part of our the 2014 team. In 2018, we started a system-wide team on workplace violence. We created a policy at the time focusing in the emergency department and was spreading into inpatient as the COVID pandemic hit. We created a best practice alert for our violence patients. We have a violence screening tool that we use within our emergency department, and we put up signage to say it is not okay. It is not okay to harm our healthcare teams. We created departmental training that went through all of emergency and psychiatric services within our emergency department, but that's not been enough. This past year, the Joint Commission has heard us, I believe, as the healthcare community very loud and clear. So as of January 1st, we as a hospital are required to do things like an annual workplace violence assessment. We should be reviewing every single case and reporting these both to our staff and to our board, looking at quality improvement initiatives. And one of the most important things is ensuring that we are providing support to our staff, whether it is through the EAP, whether it is through just other type of psychological support that we can provide peer-to-peer or within our organization. We are also going to be required to train all staff, both on hire and annually and as items change. But this is still not enough. Again, this is putting the burden on the hospitals to fix. This cannot be our problem to fix. We need your support. What our recommendations are, we have House Bill 979 is to expand and enhance protections outside of the emergency department. It should not just be the ED staff, as Destiny said. This needs to be all staff that are within the hospital, whether you are a nurse, a physician, a phlebotomist, an imaging technologist. All of our staff have had some type of interaction with patients that could have caused harm. In addition, it would be very helpful for us to have funding for de-escalation training. We have lots of things we have to do within the facility, but de-escalation training and that formal training would be very supportive for the health systems. In addition, public safety within our healthcare systems. While we are very thankful for the system that we have and for our team are just phenomenal, we need more. And I'm sure every other health system in the state of Georgia needs more support. And so to ensure that we have proper staffing and to ensure that we have throughout our 16 floors in the hospital, the ability to respond in a timely manner so that our staff is not put in a position where there's an increased harm. So these are our recommendations. We thank you again today for having us here and for giving us the opportunity to share our stories. The last thing I will wrap up with and share with you as an ER nurse many years ago, I have throughout my whole career, multiple times, I have been a victim of verbal or physical abuse. And again, did not report. The most egregious is when a very calm patient that I've known for years, I was bending down to pick up the side rail and he decided to punch me in the face. I didn't report. I didn't report because I knew him. I didn't report because as a caregiver, I felt like this is just what I do. Since that point in time, I have been an advocate for our staff that anytime something happens, report it. I expect you, I encourage you, I want you to do that. But we need your support. Our penalties, they're not enough. And not only enough, but we need to make sure that those charges are filed and can get to the point where there is a conviction so that those enhanced charges work. And that's what we need your support for. And we thank you so much for making this a priority and for having us here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open it up for questions from the committee, I know Senator Miller has his hand raised. So Butch, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. I was listening, I dialed in earlier and the healthcare worker from North Georgia Health Systems, the horrendous attack there, and hearing the testimony from the folks from Grady. And the statement was made thanking the Senate for the study committee, but it really is the other way around. We, as the Senate, need to thank those folks in the healthcare community for recognizing this and bringing it forward. And healthcare workers should not be hesitant and should not be intimidated on reporting. This is akin to, someone that's a spousal abuse. You've got to report. And we've got to give you as a legislature, we've got to give you the vehicle to report. We've got to give you the vehicle to report, and we've got to establish statewide protocols that would hopefully address and prevent this on the front end. But when these incidents occur, we need healthcare workers to have the confidence, to have the ability and the personal strength and the strength of the community to report these kind of incidents so that we can address them. We're having a hard enough time getting healthcare workers. People are leaving the field currently. It is a critical field for our communities, for our quality of life, for the future of our state. And we need to make sure as a legislature that we're supporting not only these individuals, but the industry. So I wanted to add that earlier, Madam Chair, but I actually didn't know how to raise my hand. I just had to figure it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Miller. Okay, questions from the committee. Senator Rao.
Thank you so much for coming and talk to us today. I just have two questions. First one is about the reporting system that you talked about. And I'm familiar with some different sorts of hospital reporting systems. What does your current reporting system at Grady look like? And is it like online that you log in? Is it a form that's just like open open format? Are there specific questions that people have to answer? And is there a capability for people to report in person? Because I wonder if that solicits a more complete picture of the incident.
Right. Our system is online. And so they can go in, they can put it in anonymous, they can put in information. It can be very brief. There's only a few items that absolutely have to be filled in. But we all, as leaders, will also support them through that and encourage that. And I've personally helped them sit down, and I've done some of that for them to ensure that it gets in there once we're aware of it. We try to make it as easy as possible for them to do that.
But there is also a second system. So if security is involved, so if security comes to the scene, then we file a report in our what's called our CAD system. And then if in fact there are charges that if people want to file charges, our security team is often the ones that are very supportive. They will call APD or whomever and sit with them to file those charges. It doesn't happen all the time because sometimes security is not called to some of these things. But we do have that second system, and it helps us. The CAD system really helps us to kind of identify trends as well. And then we are able to maybe redeploy posts within the health system or patrolling in certain areas. So we kind of use it for that as well.
I find it interesting what Senator Miller brought up, because we do have this culture in medicine and in other occupations where there are mandatory reporting requirements. For example, in medicine, we have to report if someone has a dog bite or a human bite or gunshot wound or certain types of communicable diseases. So it's an interesting point to bring up. Domestic abuse, again. The one other question, I'm glad you brought up security, is you had brought up about staffing models and funding for security. Can you tell me what your current security staffing plan looks like now? And if that is insufficient, what would you ideally envision? Like one per floor, one per,
So I may defer to my colleague, our executive director of security. He's right back here. So I'm going to say, Kevin, can you come up here? However, the reason we put that in there, we have about 120 security officers, but we are, a million something square foot building. And with the continued, we're building another building across the street. And with the continued increase in volumes, it is imperative that we get additional staffing. You all know how Grady is funded, so there's opportunity for us there. I think Kevin can speak to, we actually employ APD officers, detail officers to walk the perimeter and in the ER. So for us to maybe get away from having to do that, there's an opportunity there today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin August. I'm the Executive Director of Security at Grady. Just a little bit about my background. Before I came to Grady, I spent about 28 years in law enforcement, 5 as a police officer, 23 with the FBI. I retired from the FBI and then worked in corporate security for about 7 years. And then I came to Grady and I've been here for 6. So I've spent about 40 years of my life, either in security or in law enforcement. So hadn't worked in healthcare security. But based on my background, I thought I'd seen everything. Came to Grady and I realized I hadn't. So Grady is a microcosm of Atlanta. Anything that you see and hear of in Atlanta happens inside the 4 walls that we call Grady. You asked the question about what our security plan was. I'll give you an idea of what Grady looked like before I got there. When I arrived, there were situations that were occurring every day. We had people who come into the hospital exposing themselves. We had healthcare providers being assaulted. We had patients attacking patients. We had co-workers attacking each other. So it went across the entire spectrum. I had about 66 people assigned to public safety, woefully inadequate. So part of what we looked at is documenting everything that we were doing. So we went from documenting our calls in a notebook, believe it or not, to getting a automated system. When Lindsay says CAD, we're talking about a computer-aided dispatch system. And so what that allows us is we document everything electronically. We have the ability to document it and then to retrieve it ad nauseum, if we like, and it's there forever. And so we look at what's occurring, where it's occurring, the frequency of those occurrences. And then I would go to executive management and said, I need more help. So we went from 66 when I got there in 2015, we've got 120 now, and that's going to expand. We also use off-duty police officers in those high risk, high threat areas. We find that to be the emergency room, the behavioral health world, and then any area where there's a large waiting room where people are frustrated, tired, many of them suffer from mental illness. And I don't want you to walk away and think that because somebody's mentally ill, they're violent. But many of the people who are involved in acts of violence are in fact mentally ill. So when you talk about our security plan, what we do is we look at the square footage, which is 4.2 million square feet and growing. I think we're about to add another 250,000 square foot in a CAS center, which is going to be a surgery center. So as we expand, we have to use more than square footage. And I think if you look in healthcare, historically, security was placed under, and probably still is placed under, the vice president of support services. I would submit to you guys that's the wrong placement. It has to be under somebody who has major horsepower in the hospital. It has to be somebody who can actually get the resources that you need. Whoever is head of security has to be able to articulate what the problems are, provide viable solutions, and then hold people accountable, including the executive management of the hospital. And then we are looking at things from legislation after the fact. We also have to look at what do we do to be preemptive, to be predictive. We know that this is a problem. It's systemic. It's across the entire globe. If you work in healthcare, I don't care if you're in England, Australia, Hong Kong, or here in the United States, you are face to face with people who you've never seen before, who may be violent, who may be mentally ill, and may show you aggression. And many of our caregivers do not know how to handle that. So training is imperative. Staffing for anybody that's involved in security. And then those people who are involved in security are also the victims because they're attacked as well. And they're humans too. And so we need to recognize this. So the legislation has to be clear and we have to look at the enforcement side of it. So you can make all the legislation you want. If the police officers aren't enforcing it, if the judges don't recognize that this is a problem and penalize these people and convict them, then the problem will never be solved.
Thank you very much. We've got two questions from the folks on Zoom, and then we need to move along. So Senator Hatchett.
Thank you so much. To the speaker, I didn't catch your name when you first came up, but I'm glad you touched on something that I wanted to ask about. I know that overwhelmingly the number of attacks on healthcare workers are from patients. And what you were saying is what I was curious about is there a correlation between the attacks on healthcare workers and the mental health of the patient? That's the first part of my question. And the second part is, do you have any suggestions of what we can do to help this, I'm going to say, type of pandemic that we're seeing, especially following the isolation that most people experienced during the coronavirus? I've spoken to multiple sheriffs in my district talking about how the theme of seeing repetitive inmates that are mentally ill, that they can't do anything to not necessarily force them to get treatment, but they can't even give them someone to call. And I think that the theme that I heard from those that have testified so far is, I've treated this patient before. I was familiar with this patient. And I think there's also a correlation with mental health and not being able to take care of yourself and being in the hospital more often. So from your perspective, is there something we can do? And do you think it would help to have, some more resources available for helping treat mental illness? And could that potentially decrease the number of attacks on healthcare workers?
So I'll give you my opinion because I'm not a sociologist, a psychiatrist. But I can tell you this, I think there is a direct correlation between mental illness and the violence that we're seeing in the healthcare setting. I don't know exactly what precipitates this, but a lot of times you have, especially in emergency rooms, we find that the emergency rooms are filled with people who are coming off the street. Many of them don't have the ability to pay for healthcare. So they end up in our emergency rooms to receive their healthcare. Many of them are homeless. Many of the people that I've encountered who are homeless are also suffering from mental illness. So you have a nexus of a lot of things. People who don't have the means to support themselves, people who don't have housing, people who are suffering from mental illness, people who have a history of abuse and violence. And then you send them into a health system, which is crowded, overburdened. You have a problem with staffing because you can't get sufficient number of nurses. Many of those nurses are young, female, and the minute they encounter this type of aggression, they leave. And then they go elsewhere and they find that aggression is there, it's just at a different level. It's not as frequent. So that's the problem. I don't know how to solve it. I wish I did, but I think part of it is having communication between the folks involved in healthcare and those involved in government, like yourselves, who can create legislation that can help us address this problem. And then there's the secondary problem of, we don't know how to handle mental illness in this country. That's a much larger problem than we have in Georgia. This is a national problem. So I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Kelsey, you had a question?
Yes, you all mentioned in your presentation that you use a violence screening tool during the intake portion in the EC. So I'm interested to know, what is that follow-up after you flag those that are more prone to violence? Do you alert security at that time to increase rounding, or do you notify the staff there that those patients are more prone to violence?
There's twofold. One, before we could get that built, we created a best practice alert. So patients who have come to our emergency department who have a history of violence, a BPA will pop up and tell us this patient has a history of violence. So we're aware. We created a very quick process when that occurs that our physicians are supposed to respond. The goal is to get them out from triage. If that's capable, that's exactly what we want to do. Unfortunately, that's not always possible. So once we go through our triage process, we have a violence screening that's based off of points. And depending on those points, there are activities and things that we are supposed to do, such as you don't go into the room by yourself. We have a yin and yang sign that we hang on the door. There are just pieces of that we don't put them in the hallway. So there's things that we do to be able to mitigate their stimuli and the potential for poor interactions with our staff. But it's more of an alert system. When you're aware, and you are able to do things. The problem is that we get so busy, we're not always thinking, oh my gosh, this patient might do something, because we're so focused on their healthcare. So and we're glad to share. Ashley has all of that, share with you those screening tools and things that we use.
Yes, I'm sure you all send us your presentations so that we can send them to the committee. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have another person with time constraints, Dr. Ben Hunter from the Georgia Psychiatric Physicians Association, who is on Zoom. Ben, have you got a few remarks to give us?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Kirkpatrick, and sorry to join you all late, but yeah, just wanted to comment on a couple things that I just heard, and I think can provide some clarity. As a practicing psychiatrist, I'm the medical director at a residential psych facility. I've worked at a number of different hospitals, both in the ER and on the floors. We can speak a little bit, in generalities at least, to which types of patients are most at risk of perpetrating violence. And I think we just hit on one of the most important things. And one of the things I was going to mention was that, having a violence screening tool at the outset from the emergency room on forward is critical, because we know that the best predictor of future violent behavior in patients in a hospital is a history of past violent or aggressive behavior. So that's number one. I think taking those screening tools seriously, really applying them, again, early on in the hospital treatment is critical. Often by the time the patient's already up on the floor, the medical staff is ethically dedicated to taking care of these patients. And there's really not a whole lot we can do in terms of adjusting their course, or maybe, again, thinking about a different setting for their care if there's somebody who doesn't seem to have fared well on the floors in the past. The other thing we know is that, again, resources are scarce mental health wise in most hospitals. I can recall being in hospitals like Grady or Emory or University of Pennsylvania in Philly. And often you're a sole psychiatrist covering an entire hospital system at night, especially when these events tend to happen. And even just having additional, again, whether it's psychologists, additional psychiatrists, to help kind of proactively manage some of the issues that are arising, because often the team will know well in advance. They'll have warning signs. Patients are starting to escalate and get a little bit agitated. Having more resources to actually go in and address these issues in real time so that it doesn't escalate to the point where you're actually having violence happen, I think is the single biggest preventive factor we can engage here. And then to mention also, just from the standpoint of what to do from the outset, a lot of hospitals have behavioral health units in the ER as well. And as we were just mentioning, again, taking these patients out of the hallways, out of multiple occupancy areas, and getting them into a dedicated area where the stimuli are minimized. You've got nurses and staff who are trained to work with patients with mental health issues. Really, we saw that at the University of Pennsylvania really decrease the number of incidents we had in the ER. And it happened pretty quickly too. So also just a more satisfying experience for the patients. They get better healthcare. I'll make one kind of final important comment. I think, the misconception is that the patients who commit violence in healthcare systems are, serious mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. That is actually fairly uncommon. Much more common of an issue is patients who are dealing with primary addiction issues. So patients either withdrawing from or intoxicated with drugs or alcohol. That is by far your single biggest set of patients who perpetrate these types of issues. So again, resources for detoxification and rehabilitation programs in particular, having a protocol for managing patients who are coming in with medical issues who also may be suffering from addiction and are prone to, again, begin withdrawing on the medical floor. And all of a sudden you get a team who's not as apt to deal with the withdrawal syndromes and things like that. Again, a little bit more psychiatric resources would be the first step to helping, prevent some of those issues from escalating into more serious kind of violent acts.
Thank you. I'm hoping we can get the violence screening tool that you guys are using. Any questions for Dr. Hunter? Senator Miller, I see your hand still raised. Do you just not know how to put it down, or do you have another question?
I beg your pardon. I'll put my hand down now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. We know you have to go. We're a little behind schedule, and so I just need everybody to try to be as concise as you can. And I know I saw Anna Adams walk in. Anna from the Georgia Hospital Association, if you could come up to the podium, please. While Anna's going up there, I want to let you know that I had a conversation with the training folks at GIPSTEC, the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. They do a robust training program for their law enforcement officers that's mandatory based on legislation that we did. And they are happy to help in terms of at-risk people. They're certainly the highest. And so they know a lot about this, and I didn't ask them to come, but they're willing to help us develop whatever training is appropriate. So Anna.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Speak up because people can't hear you in the back.
Can you hear me now?
Better. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm so glad that you got to hear this morning from Northeast Georgia and Grady. These are both very large facilities who have a huge patient volume, but I want to point out that these types of issues are happening across the board at our small rural hospitals, all the way up to our large facilities like Grady in Northeast Georgia. And it's not an anomaly to see these violent situations happening in our emergency departments, especially. I think the pandemic has highlighted our huge workforce shortage in the state. This is a long-standing workforce shortage, but in the past year and a half, we have seen the lack of nursing staff, the lack of respiratory staff, and these individuals are showing up to work every day as healthcare heroes, and they're being abused by our patients, family members, and frankly, sometimes by other staff. And so I wanted to highlight today a point for you, and Senator Kirkpatrick, you brought this up earlier, that these types of violent situations within the hospital community are often subject to workers' comp filings. And so GHA has a partnership with Gallagher through our workers' compensation self-insurance fund. And they pulled some data for me about what has been claimed from a workers' comp standpoint in the last calendar year related to what they call injured by fellow worker or patient. And 22% of the total claims, which is the highest percentage of claims filed, is due to these injuries for violent situations, either by a patient or a fellow worker or a patient family member. And we unfortunately saw that even more exacerbated because of the pandemic. And we had these conversations with you just this past legislative session about the need to make sure that our staff members are safe. The Georgia Hospital Association recently did a survey of our membership, and we sent this out to our in-house counsel, our risk managers, and asked them questions about what their violence against healthcare workers policies look like, what they see in their hospitals. And the resounding answers were fairly similar across the board in that most hospitals see the most violent interactions from behavioral health patients that are in their emergency departments. And so these are patients who need to be transferred out to either another facility. Maybe they need to go to a state facility, a crisis stabilization unit. And because it's taking so long, they become agitated. We're trying to keep them calm, but it's just not always easy, especially when you have the workforce shortage that we're all experiencing right now. Also in that category, they put patients with dementia who are often confused and don't understand what's happening. And so they become violent. Drug-seeking patients, patients who have opioid use disorders, who are coming into the facility to ask for certain specific medications. And when they're unable to get those, they become violent. And then patients experiencing long wait times. And that has absolutely been exacerbated by COVID. I know you've all seen the news with patients who have been in the hospital for hours because we're trying to move them into the hospital. We're at capacity. We don't have anywhere to put them. And so those wait times are incredibly long and people become agitated. This survey resulted in a few interesting things that I want to share with you, and I want to attribute these to any one particular hospital. But we did have one facility who indicated that assaulting a nurse outside of the emergency department, because it is a misdemeanor, their local sheriff's department is hesitant to arrest these individuals or to go after them, because it's a misdemeanor. And so we would encourage you to consider expanding the current statute to all healthcare workers, not just emergency workers. We have facilities who are considering additional security measures like installing metal detectors, the kinds of things that you see at an airport. And so when you're going into the hospital and you expect care, and these individuals are here showing up every day to provide you that care, and you have to treat it like it's a dangerous environment with metal detectors and visible security guards and visible surveillance systems, it changes the whole dynamic of the hospital system. But our first priority, number one, is to protect our staff and patients. So I will wrap up with that. I do want to ask that you, again, please consider expanding this to all healthcare workers. And we are at the Georgia Hospital Association always available to answer any additional questions if you have them.
Thank you, Anna. And I hope that you'll send us some written comments.
Yes, ma'am.
So that we don't have to try to remember all that.
It was a lot of info.
Questions from the committee? Anyone? Okay, great. Thank you. Next, is Dawn Fletcher here? Dawn is representing NAMI Georgia, the National Association of Mental Illness, and she has some comments. And I believe Dawn is also a nurse, and we're looking forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Okay, my voice normally carries, so just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. Okay, great. So thank you, Chair Kirkpatrick, and other members of this commission and all of the stakeholders who have been here this morning sharing your experiences with workplace violence in your areas. As you noted, my name is Dawn Fletcher, and I am a nurse executive And right now I'm in school pursuing my Doctor of Nursing practice. I graduate in December, and my doctoral studies have focused on workplace violence prevention in healthcare systems. One of my roles at Emory Healthcare is as the Director of Patient Care Practice for the Behavioral Health Service line. I do have a couple of other things I do there as well, though I come here today to speak on behalf of NAMI Georgia and the Georgia Mental Health Policy Partnership, which I'm going to refer to as GMHPP because that is a mouthful to have to keep putting out. So the GMHPP was started by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Georgia, Mental Health America of Georgia, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness Georgia several years ago, and now includes approximately 20 organizations in Georgia focused on mental and behavioral health. GMHPP organizations represent the vast majority of individuals with mental illness and substance abuse challenges, as well as their families, friends, and allies. So workplace violence is classified as an epidemic by the World Health Organization and is a major issue in healthcare. The Joint Commission defines workplace violence as an act or threat occurring at the workplace that can include any of the following: verbal, nonverbal, written, or physical aggression, threatening, intimidating, harassing, or humiliating words or actions, bullying, sabotage, sexual harassment, physical assaults, or other behaviors of concern involving staff, licensed practitioners, patients, or visitors. Risk factors for workplace violence are associated with the patient, the setting, the victim, and the organization. Emergency departments, psychiatric facilities, and home health care settings have disproportionate amount of workplace violence events. So Georgia ranks 51st out of the 50 states in DC in terms of its citizens' access to mental health care. There are 87 mental health care health professional shortage areas in Georgia, which encompasses more than 4.9 million Georgians. In Georgia, the lack of timely and appropriate medical care for persons experiencing a mental health crisis is a function of the severe shortage of mental health professionals and paraprofessionals in the state. Further, a critical shortage of psychiatric beds forces mentally ill patients with severe symptoms to be held in emergency rooms and hospitals while they wait for a bed. This practice is known as psychiatric boarding, and it prevents patients from getting the level of care that they need. Instead, such patients are sometimes put in restraints or seclusion and often receive little or no mental health services. So it's human nature to want an easy fix to this. And what I've learned through my research, data from my existing work at Emory, and personal experience is that we've only touched the surface of this complex problem. Workplace violence events that result in assaults often have precipitating events. For example, healthcare workers that perceive a threat may use measures such as seclusion, restraint, or enforced meds, which often patients describe as traumatic and can in turn trigger aggressive responses from patients instead of engagement and cooperation with treatment. So what can be done? I don't think I'm going to say anything new here that other folks have not suggested, but please consider how policy and funding can help to foster innovation. An example I'll give of that is the ability to provide telemedicine for psychiatric patients that helps us to hit folks in rural locations. And I know some of the work along the pandemic has actually helped to allow us to be reimbursed for those services. And that's something that's actually needed to be continued as we climb out of this. I would also say we need to provide the appropriate access to mental health care to vulnerable Georgians across the state, as well as educate our healthcare professionals both in school and for continuing education. There are evidence-based solutions such as crisis intervention training and trauma-informed care that lay a critical foundation for this work. Folks have already hit a lot on the crisis intervention training. I did just want to say one organization that provides this training reports their program outcomes as providing a 60% reduction in challenging behaviors, a 54% reduction in restraint use, and a 94% improvement in de-escalation skills and overall safety. As it relates to trauma-informed care, this approach offers a way, trauma-informed care offers a way to approach patients and patient care delivery that acknowledges the commonality of trauma and its impact, and can prevent inadvertent re-traumatization of patients in healthcare settings. A healthcare worker who is trauma-informed will promote the safety of patients and coworkers alike, and will be able to understand and work with potentially violent patients to protect everyone's safety. I know that the Joint Commission work has already been presented. I was going to talk a little bit about that. So I'd like to close with that seeking more and better ways to address workplace violence in healthcare setting benefits everyone. And I think as folks have been going around and talking, there's a lot of best practices that have been identified. The code BERT that was spoken about, that is actually something that the advisory board put out as a best practice several years ago. And hearing about the violence screenings, there are multiple to choose from. So I think learning from each other and the best practices in our hospitals and, maybe even in home health or inpatient psychiatric facilities would be a way forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope you'll submit some written comments. You're actually the one who let me know about the new JCAHO standard. Did you want to say anything about what that's going to involve?
So I've got it here just in a nutshell. As of January 1, 2022, the Joint Commission will begin to hold healthcare organizations accountable for workplace violence prevention. They'll be looking for evidence that the organization manages safety and security risks through worksite analysis and risk mitigation. The organization collects information to monitor conditions, reporting, and investigating events. And again, a lot of folks have been talking about reporting, and my other hat that I wear for Emory Healthcare and the work that I do for workplace violence prevention. I'll say the tagline that I've come up with is report, respond, and support. For all of this, we do need reporting, so we do understand what the root causes of the violence are, so we can actually mitigate those and be proactive in addressing them. Another one of the standards would be that staff participate in ongoing training and education, and that leaders create and maintain a culture of safety and quality. And this surrounds policy and procedures, incident reporting and analysis, follow-up and support for victims, and reporting events to governing body.
Thank you. I think you highlighted something that we really need, which is more data. We don't seem to have a lot of information, and there's clearly underreporting for various reasons. So thank you for highlighting that. I really appreciate it. Questions from the committee? Anyone? Thank you. Very helpful. Thanks for being with us. Okay, I'd like to ask Judge Ben Vinson to come up. Judge Vinson runs the State Board of Workers' Compensation, and he's going to kind of explain to us how that works and anything that he's seen that's relevant to our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for asking me to be here this morning. I will be brief. My name is Ben Vinson. I'm the chair and chief appellate judge at the State Board of Workers' Compensation. I've been on the state board since 2017, and I've been the chair since May of this year. I want to begin, Madam Chair, thank you for reaching out to us at the state board on this topic. Thank you for recognizing the connection to the workers' comp system. I know you have experience with workers' comp, so I applaud you for making that connection and inviting us and giving us the opportunity to speak to the committee this morning. So the basic question would be this type of assault or violence in the workplace. How would the workers' compensation system be involved, and how would it be handled? Would that type of incident be compensable under workers' comp? And the general answer, which I will go ahead and immediately caveat, I'm a judge, I handle cases. I'm not speaking on a specific case here. I'm not addressing a specific incident that may have occurred and how I would rule on that, or how other judges in the comp system might rule on that. I'll speak generally. The facts always matter in every single case. It's a case-by-case analysis. That being said, the general rule would be that if the incident or injury is arising out of and in the course of the employment, then it would be compensable under workers' comp. So the easiest and simplest way to say that would be, would the injury be causally connected to the job duties? In that case, probably compensable under workers' comp. A couple of big exceptions would be if the injured employee is the aggressor of this fight or assault or whatever incident occurred. So you might have a possibility where it would not be compensable if the injured employee is the aggressor. Another exception would be if this incident or this assault could be deemed personal and not work related. So did they know each other beforehand? Were they fighting about something else? Is there some other reason that as you study this case that it might not really be that connected to the job and more of a personal animosity between the two fighters or between anybody involved in the situation? But certainly with that employee, was it personal to them or were they the aggressor? You might have another defense related to if perhaps the employee was under the influence of drugs or alcohol, then maybe there would be a way of pulling it out of comp and it wouldn't be compensable. But as a general rule, I would think you would find these assaults, what we've heard here today, this type of incident would be compensable under workers' comp. So that's I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll tell you that I've only seen a handful of cases. Most of the claims that come through the comp system are handled very quickly. The employer insured do the right thing. Injured worker gets medical help and then they get back to work. So the cases that make it all the way to me are going to be unique cases, and that's very rare.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I did have one question. It's been a long time since I was on the medical committee at the Workers' Comp Board, but I remember there was a big debate all the time about physical injury versus non-physical injury, if you will. Could you just comment on how that stands in our current statute and rules and regs?
Absolutely. Madam Chair, the state of Georgia, under the comp system, we don't recognize mental only injuries. So you would not really be able to pursue, the law would not be set up to accommodate simply a mental only injury. You would have to connect it to a physical injury in some way. So there could be a component of your claim that might become compensable if you have PTSD or some other aspect, but you're going to have some physical aspect to that first, and then you can have a mental component.
I know that's been a hot debate over many years. So thank you. Questions from the committee? Dr. Dave?
Number 9, thank you for that information. Have you been able to quantify, or in these instances where we hear of cases where the injured person has threats against themselves, et cetera? I mean, while those can be perceived criminal, is there any component of that in the calculus in terms of harm to an employee?
Do you mean the criminal aspect of it specifically, or what's
sorry if I'm not asking the question specifically, but in terms of quantifying the emotional harm to an employee when their name may be released, or some of the threats that it's going to affect their mental health, and even if it's tied to a physical injury. Have you come across those in your cases, and how do you calculate that?
So we would not do that in the workers' comp scenario. In the workers' comp scenario, it would just be based on a fee schedule. So your medical, fees, medical costs are going to be controlled by the fee schedule. And then whatever your salary is and however you're being paid, that's how you calculate the indemnity benefits that you get for being out of work. So that would be, you may have a situation where you could pursue your claim in civil court and you might be able to go after some type of damages like that. But not in the workers' comp scenario. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And I hope all of our healthcare organizations are well aware of how the workers' compensation system fits into this overall issue. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
Other questions, anyone? Okay, thanks. Okay, next, Pete Scanilakis. I saw him here earlier. Pete, come on up. Pete's representing the Prosecuting Attorneys Council.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be very brief. I think I can adopt everything that Ms. Fletcher said because I think she hit all the crucial points right on. There's very little data that we can tell because we don't separate out healthcare workers who've been subject to assault or violence in the court in the emergency rooms or the hospitals. Let me back up. First of all, let me introduce myself to people who don't know me. My name is Pete Scanilakis. I am the Executive Director for the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia. And prior to that, I was a line prosecutor for 37 years, and I was the elected district attorney for the Coweta Judicial Circuit for 25 years. So I have some experience in matters such as this. But again, I will tell you exactly what Ms. Fletcher told you. First of all, it's very interesting to listen to all the experts because of the fact that a lot of these incidents are not reported. And if they're not reported, there's really not a lot we can do in the criminal justice system to address them. So that's one of the things that I encourage this committee to adopt some manner of a standardized report that you can analyze and look at and see exactly what's happening in our hospitals. I also like the idea of what Ms. Fletcher mentioned was crisis intervention and workplace violence prevention. That's an essential element because by the time you get to the criminal justice system, by the time you get to the point where the case is reported, it's investigated, and it's brought through the court system, exactly what Ms. Destiny was talking about is an experience that all healthcare workers will have to undergo. It is not easy. Y'all have heard about the hospitals being under-resourced. I can tell you law enforcement agencies are under-resourced. And when you talk about Grady Hospital that serves so many patients a year, which is an astronomical number that I heard. And, I applaud the security team that Grady has. You have to also remember every time they make a report and ask for an Atlanta police officer to show up, that's an Atlanta Police Department that is now experiencing hundreds of vacancies. So you're also talking about that type of delay. There's a lot that can be done. And I think it starts from the reporting, because without data, without knowing what caused the incident, without knowing how we can prevent it, it's very difficult to get in there and prosecute. I will tell you my experience as a prosecutor has been that, yes, one speaker talked about, I think it was Ms. Adams, to expanding one of the statutes to include healthcare workers. I can tell you that even without such a statute, when we had something happening at one of our hospitals in one of my circuits, we had substantial penalties, substantial statutes that would cover that incident, even if that person was not listed as a specific victim, simply because we didn't want to tolerate that type of behavior to people who were in the workplace. And I say that for anything. It's very disconcerting to hear every one of our experts here say that it's just part of the job. It's just part of the job. I disagree with that. It's not part of the job. It's never part of the job to be subjected to physical violence. Verbal violence and threats, those are covered by the statute. Physical violence are covered by statutes. We've got the laws on the books. I can train, one of my jobs as executive director is to train prosecutors and investigators what to do in cases like this. We have the ability to do that. I'm willing to do that and assist the hospital associations. But it starts with reporting. It starts with data. Without data, we have no idea what we're looking at. And that's what I've heard over and over and over again. So that's about all I have to say on the matter. I know y'all are behind schedule. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much. That's one of the questions that we were asking when we were setting this committee up is we did pass a law protecting our emergency healthcare workers, but we can't really tell if that law is being used to prosecute people because they're not split out separately. And so there's really, it's all anecdotal at this point, and the healthcare systems can give us data, but we're just piecing that together because there's
particularly
no.
if it's a healthcare worker that's not covered under that statute, you're not going to be able to pick that up on GCIC. And so that's one of the biggest problems.
Other questions from the committee? Thanks. It's very helpful to understand the prosecution side of things.
Appreciate it.
Okay, and then next we have Maisie Lynn Causey. You've been waiting patiently.
Of course.
Representing the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Thank you for being here.
Yes,
Giving
Madam
you
Chair.
not the last word, but almost the last word.
All right, and I will do my best to be efficient. Thank you so much for inviting us to come today. It's good to see you virtually, Speaker Pro Tem Miller, and the rest of the committee. Thank you for serving us, the citizens of Georgia, in this way. It's always lovely when I can come up behind Pete Scanilakis and agree with him. We often find ourselves on opposite sides of issues, but here we agree. And I join him in being concerned for the violence that's happening. No one in any workplace deserves to be treated with such physical or mental violence. And we do have sufficient laws on the books right now with very extreme penalties that will cover any of us who are harmed in the ways that, for instance, we heard about from Destiny today. We do hesitate to ask for this committee to consider any expansion of 16, 5, 19, 21, and 24, which were mentioned earlier by the representatives from Grady and from the Hospital Association. At some point in time, when everyone becomes a status victim of our crimes, we're going to eat up the crimes with the status victims. We all deserve to be safe in our workplaces, full stop. And the crimes that are on the books, the sentencing and punishments that's available are sufficient today. I would love if someone knows that the bill that was cited earlier today, I cannot find it in existence. It was House Bill 979. The last House bill that I see filed in our system right now is 854. So if maybe I could get with whoever has that bill, we would love to respond more particularly to any legislation the committee does consider in making your recommendations to the Senate this year. But when we talk about status victims, I guess I would turn your attention to recent media reports about other industries that are facing a lot of anxiety and stress. You may have seen just this week, there was a young woman in New York City, a hostess at a famous restaurant there, was attacked by 3 women over a mask argument. That hostess also doesn't deserve to be treated that way as she's, working in the hospitality industry. Again, we all deserve to be safe. We don't need to continue to expand the statuses because we have sufficient penalties. We are concerned that there's not a way to track what's happening because it looks like from the reporting by the Georgia Public Broadcasting yesterday that the changes in the workplace crimes have not been reduced by the Back the Badge bill, which we've referred to today several times. This is Senate Bill 160, was passed back in 2016, expanded coverage to emergency healthcare workers. There is no evidence that that's helping. And frankly, we at GACTL are not surprised by that because we know that increasing punishment generally does not deter crime. When people are committing crimes, they are not usually informed of the punishments that they could be subject to were they to be convicted of that crime. We know that general deterrence is not happening from increased punishments. And we also know that it doesn't specifically deter crime. That is, people who are convicted of crimes and punished in our carceral system, we have pretty high recidivism rates because of the barriers that happen once someone is convicted of a crime in our society. There are barriers to employment, there are barriers to housing, and unfortunately, people then get caught in our systems. So we're back to punishment. Increased punishments are not the solution here. Dr. Dave, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, I noticed that the reporter spoke with you in this story yesterday, the public broadcasting story, and you were talking there about some of how the restlessness that you're seeing among people who are waiting for care because of the increased volume in the hospitals, the anger that families are expressing because of the visitation policies that have had to be put in place during the pandemic to keep everyone safe. The levels of angst and dealing with death and severe illness at a time when the pandemic is causing us to not be able to collectively grieve grieve and care for one another is exceptionally high. And when you add that on top of the job losses that people are facing during the pandemic, the housing losses, the other non-medical stresses that we're all facing, the sheer volume of people that are interacting in our hospital settings, it is not a surprise that the security incidents are increasing. When you have a volume of people increasing with that kind of agitation and angst, we would expect, unfortunately, for these things to happen. We are concerned about what Dr. Hunter was mentioning earlier, and Ms. Fletcher as well, this nexus between the mental health concerns and the behaviors that the healthcare industry is seeing among their patients. You know, in the criminal legal system, we don't mean to punish people whose behaviors are not intentional. We need people to be functioning from a robust executive functioning dimension, right? We don't prosecute people who don't know what they're doing. And so we do need to have some better understanding of ways to mitigate that violence in the mental health context, not only in our hospitals, but frankly in our jails as well. You know, I'm not a medical professional, just a lawyer. And in this pandemic, I'm also a mom raising a couple of very young children who are not able to be vaccinated due to their age. The stress and weight of just my, frankly, privileged life has been a lot to bear, and I'm sure it is for everyone in this room. We've all been suffering extra levels of stress due to the pandemic. And this anxiety and stress is running high across the board, not to mention the overburdened healthcare system, those having to go and seek that medical care at a time when in their lives they are feeling vulnerable and fraught in the best of times. Yesterday, it's worth noting that the Senate Public Safety Committee discussed that we are seeing higher levels of crime across the city, across the state, and across the country. We seem to be a country and a state that is boiling over. And as much as I hate to know that the men and women who are endeavoring to heal us, to heal our physical wounds, to heal our mental wounds, are suffering needless harm, we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We can't arrest our way out of it in our hospitals, and we can't arrest our way out of it in our streets. As a practical matter, our criminal legal system cannot handle this either. The backlog of cases that's waiting to be processed in our courts is daunting. It's not unlike the healthcare system in this way. The stakeholders in the system, we are having trouble retaining and recruiting prosecutors, police officers, and defense lawyers. We cannot recruit and retain them well enough. You may know that the Justice Department has just launched an investigation into Georgia's prisons. It's focused in part on prisoner-on-prisoner violence. And specifically, during the pandemic, from January 2020 through August of this year, there have been at least 48 homicides or suspected homicides in our prisons. And in that same time period, there have been at least 38 documented suicides in Georgia's prisons. We have a mental health care crisis in our hospitals, in our state, and in our prisons. Our prisons are boiling over, our schools, and our hospitals. We urge you to take a step back and consider the violence that you're here to address, not as something the criminal legal system can fix, but as the mental health concern that it seems to be. We appreciate hearing all of the mitigation and preventative measures that some of the hospitals are able to take now, and join Ms. Fletcher and the others in asking for any funding and resources that can be made available to enhance the mental health care at the intake level at the hospital, as well as in the mental health facilities that are available to treat people already in the criminal legal system. Let's break the cycle of trying to address mental health concerns with criminal, legal, and carceral measures. That's our request.
Thank you, Ms. Causey. Questions from the committee? Yeah, it struck me, one of the things that you said is, we passed legislation and we pat ourselves on the back and say, oh yeah, we fixed this. And we did that 2016, I guess. But that's the entire reason that we've got such a broad group of people speaking to this, is hopefully between all the stakeholders from different points of view, we can come up with some actual solutions that work. So that's what this committee is all about. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, and Mike Hodges, are you here? Can you give us about 5 minutes worth of wisdom, because we have 10 minutes left.
I make no promises about wisdom, but I will keep my comments brief. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, Senators, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I hope these words carry some meaningful use to you in your work. My name is Mike Hodges. I am the System Director of Public Safety for Piedmont Healthcare. We're a 16 hospital system and the largest healthcare provider in the state of Georgia. For the last 11 years, I have worked as a healthcare security professional, and each of those 11 years has been consumed with violence prevention work, not out of choice, but out of necessity. The epidemic of violence in healthcare is endemic to our industry and has only grown in scope and severity over the last decade. I would like to take the few minutes I have today to tell you there are some real tangible things we can do about it. The first point I'd like to make is that violence against healthcare workers can only be addressed when it is approached collaboratively within healthcare organizations. The violence epidemic in healthcare is primarily a product of issues related to various forms of disease progression, and thus it must be approached both clinically and with the support of specially trained healthcare security staff. Some of these clinical interventions have been mentioned today. Clinical violence risk assessments are a phenomenal tool, especially when you utilize the third generation structured tools that have been the structured approach tools that have been put out that relate both clinical judgment with well-defined rules of assessment. These tools have proved invaluable to creating early warnings to violence prevention, and we've seen absolute indicators that they improve the quality of the patient care experience as well. So not only can we keep our staff safe, but we can also improve the patient experience and the patient's care. We've seen specific tools in studies produce reductions in violence ranging from 41% to 68% in various studies across various clinical care settings, and reduce the use of negative clinical outcomes like restraints and seclusion by 27% up to 45% in some of those very same studies. I would also like to point to the behavioral rapid response teams that have been mentioned. Use of those tools and creating that code-like response where we see that collaboration come to the bedside at the first warning signs of escalation provides the best case scenario, not only for, again, the staff safety, but also for the improvement of the patient care. In implementations of a behavioral rapid response team in the Yale New Haven Hospital in Connecticut, we saw that it showed statistically significant reductions in both the length of stay for the patient, as well as the use of one-on-one safety sitters needed for the safety of the patient. Other implementations in hospitals like the NYU Langone Hospital in Brooklyn produced a 56% reduction in assaults on nurses. These are tools that are effective not only for the safety of our staff, but they intervene before the violence manifests itself. And that gives us the opportunity to provide the best possible care for our patients, which is our goal after all. My second point of consideration that I'd like to share with you today is that use of tools like these require that we spend time investing in the development of our healthcare security forces. We see a significant variation in the quality of security staff assigned to various hospitals around the state. And taking the time to invest in the services that those individuals provide, that those teams provide, is absolutely paramount. We have to have robust training requirements for those staff in both physical and verbal intervention skills. We have to invest in those staff so that they can provide tools like protective intelligence programs and investigative follow-up to support their healthcare workers. Finally, I'd like to offer the opportunity for those staff to gain access to enhanced law enforcement support. Senator, you mentioned training at the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. Having access to training programs at that center would be invaluable to healthcare security forces. Title 20, Chapter 8 of the OCGA Code offers education organizations with the opportunity to set up internal full-service campus police forces. These are some of the best trained and best equipped police agencies in our state. Similar allowances under Title 31 could potentially offer healthcare systems the same opportunity. Additionally, investment in the clinical care capacities of our local jails could help alleviate the need for sheriff's agencies to turn over violent offenders to their local emergency department, which is often resulting in assaults in our emergency departments. And finally, like everyone else here, I would like to advocate for stronger laws and victim support for healthcare workers that are assaulted. Ultimately, these are just a few suggestions, but it is my hope that they're helpful. There is tremendous opportunity here, and healthcare is a critical asset that we continue to see create positive impacts on our communities around the state of Georgia and around the nation, especially in the last year. And this is an area where we can truly show support for those amazing community members and healthcare heroes. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Anyone online? I hope that you'll send us your
absolutely
remarks, because again, we're looking for solutions. We know that in our society, we're dealing with increased violent behavior across the board, and healthcare is just a reflection of what's going on in the bigger picture. So if we can come up with some ways to help our heroes in the healthcare industry, that's what we're trying to do. Dr. Dave?
Sorry, thank you, Senator. Number 9, the question I had is for the 16 hospitals. Can you speak to, is there any diversity and mitigation strategies based on the size of the hospital or its location?
So I would say there's diversity and mitigation strategies based on the type of clinical care environment, not necessarily the size of the facility. So when we look at, especially, special clinical care environments like psychiatric units, neurological services, things like that, where we see higher rates of mental illness or higher rates of behavioral illness, those are going to be areas where we have different interventions. Emergency departments, as we've discussed, always see special and different security sensitive additions to those programs, but it's going to be varied based on the type of care provided, not necessarily by the size of the facility. Thank you all very much.
Thanks to everyone who testified and submitted remarks, and we'll be trying to put all this together into something useful and really make a difference here. But I really appreciate, especially the people who came from a distance and have been sitting here patiently for 2 hours. We are out of time, so we'll be in touch with all of you, but please submit any other information that you think would be useful or helpful to the committee as we do our deliberations. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.